how is the intersection between biodiversity benefits and social and cultural benefits being conceptualized in the model? E.g., are social, cultural benefits mainly seen as ecosystem services from improving biodiversity, and are these reflected through priorities identified in the regional priorities, e.g., protecting threatened species being a social cultural priority, and or is there some thought to also measuring social and cultural benefits in their own right? You might have read that yourself out of the chat, Don.
I'm hoping that's not a question to me, actually. No, I'll answer it in the first place. So our focus is on biodiversity benefit for the stewardship work we're doing, and that the model I've just explained is focused on that component. So the biodiversity benefit recognised through those assets of ecosystems, riparian vegetation and threatened species. Taking a step back from that, recognising that biodiversity is only one part of the benefit story from the sorts of activities we're talking about, my view is that you do need a different approach to measuring social and cultural benefits. And if you look at something like the co-benefit standard for the Land Restoration Fund, we did have different approaches to measuring those things. That document still, and also for biodiversity benefit, it's primarily just a binary yes, no, are there benefits? And I think it's beyond my expertise to talk, certainly publicly, about how you'd quantify those benefits. But in short, no, we're not conceptualizing cultural and social benefits in the model I just described. It's just biodiversity.
And if you want me to come at it from the other side, yeah, we don't look at that. The philosophy we took to the pricing was, what is the incentive that's necessary to get the landholder to undertake a project activity? And so it was purely a financial exercise to work out what we think is the rate of return that's necessary on a project to see a farmer say, yeah, I'm into it. We didn't seek to quantify any social benefits or anything that might stem from the project in that respect. And we weren't so much even trying to value biodiversity as to come up with a price point that's that sufficient incentive to get them over the line. And it's a very similar approach to what's used in pricing infrastructure in Australia. So if all the infrastructure, most of the infrastructure assets you see lying around the place, whether they be transmission lines, ports, desalination plants, a very similar philosophy is taken to pricing those things. And so it's just basically carried it over into the environment space.
What is the discount rate used for calculating the NPV, and is it dynamic and or linked to something? So I'm not actually sure which one of you.
We don't answer that. We obviously, if we disclose the full details of the model, then that would result in gaming by people. So the idea is we keep some key parameters private. One of them is the discount rate. We also don't disclose the carbon price that we use in the model. They're sort of the two key parameters that we don't disclose. Unfortunately, I'd love to have the discussion about what exactly that number is, because it's a really interesting question in ourselves, and I'll tell you, we debated it internally right up until, well, the final second, I think, as we so it's yeah, it's an interesting question, what rate of return changes people's behaviour.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I've got another question here. So I'm just wondering, do you think the pilot could be applied to other methods in the future? Is there potential for a method like HIR to be incorporated into a pilot where you're seeking better biodiversity outcomes?
Yeah, there is. We would and have advocated for the combination of human-induced regeneration into the environmental plantings method to allow a combination of those activities to be undertaken, particularly in the intensive ag zone, where we've got high confidence in the additionality of the project activities. And we see that as something that's really prospective. It'll help really drive down the costs of plantings. I can see quite a few people on this call who have a lot of expertise in putting trees in the ground, and all of you would know that it's not a cheap exercise. If you combine it with human-induced regeneration, you can make a big difference. Once you get out of the intensive ag zone, things get considerably more complex about what is the project actually achieving, and is it actually driving any co-benefits? because the vegetation in the rangelands is often native vegetation and often remnant native vegetation. But in those intensive ag zones, you don't have that. You have, as Don was saying, you often start off with a clear paddock and you put trees and restore it. So it's a much easier exercise in identifying what the co-benefits are likely to be in those circumstances, and also to have much more confidence in what the additionality of the activity is.
Thanks, Andrew. I've got a question here from Kate Forrest. So what were the main drivers of uptake from landholders? And did those tend to match with the drivers of the C+B aims, or did you have to, or they have to modify them as they went?
Don, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to?
Have a crack. I'll see if there's anything to add. I think.
You want me to have a go? Yeah. Look, the motivations of people getting involved, from what we can tell, really go across the spectrum. We had those who were in it because they just wanted trees in the landscape. They wanted to restore their properties or parts of their properties, and they saw this as a way of subsidising that activity, and that was great. A lot of those applicants were really keen on getting an upfront payment and wanted that payment to be as large as possible to cover as much of their establishment costs as possible. Interestingly, a lot of them weren't interested in, a number of that cohort weren't overly interested in the carbon, with even several of them saying, take the carbon. I don't care about the carbon. What I want is the trees on my property. So we had that collection of applicants, and then motivated by primarily non-financial factors, or there's a big non-financial incentive or motivation in what they're doing. At the other end of the spectrum, we had the really hard-nosed business people who were there purely for the financial return, or predominantly for the financial return, and they were driven a lot by the returns that they were seeing from the projects. In a lot of cases, they were probably best described as the more sophisticated player who had a better understanding of environmental markets and of carbon markets. I know that several of them replicated the model that we built, and we're getting rates of return that were commensurate with what our model was actually showing, which was kind of heartening in some respects, frightening in others. And then there were those who sat in the middle, who were a bit of a blend. You know, they were motivated by a combination of financial and by other reasons. And I will sort of emphasize, there are also a number who made it quite clear that some of their motivations for wanting to get and undertake these projects was both the biodiversity benefits they can bring, but also the co-benefits for agricultural production. You know, people seeing that trees in livestock operations, for example, can provide co-benefits to livestock production. So unfortunately, it sounds like the classic lawyer response. In the end, it was a real mix, but it genuinely was a real mix. We're not just making that up. Having spoken to a large proportion of them, I can assure you that was the case. Don, anything I missed?
I just add, I think there is genuine merit in the view that a diversification of income streams is important for landholders. You do hear that a bit. And that includes the opportunity to plant some trees now that might lead to a sustainable timber resource in time, as well as the opportunity to engage with carbon markets and other markets.
Yeah, we had, it's 100%, Don. We had a number of them also telling us, look, we were thinking we want to make sure that what we plant is suitable for harvesting and suitable for use of timber down the track when they come out of their permanence periods, which is interesting. And as Don said there, definitely the diversification of income is a big part of it. And even for, you know, that more sophisticated end of the market, you know, the opportunity to diversify their income streams is one of the reasons why a number of them were looking at this opportunity.
That's interesting. That the people were interested in the source of timber for the future. So just on that, so there isn't a obligation to have the plantings remain indefinitely. Was it sort of 25-year permanence period? You can sort of get rid of them after that. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So you get a choice between a 25-year permanence period or a 100-year permanence period. If you pick the longer one, you get a boost. Don gives them a boost in his scoring. Also, if you pick a smaller, pick the 25-year permanence period, our pricing model treats you as if you're a 100-year permanence period. Because if it didn't, you get fewer carbon credits, or you get less carbon revenue. So the model would generate a higher price for you. So you get treated as if you have a 100-year permanence period in order to provide that incentive for people to go longer.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for that. We did have a question about the average size of plantings, but I see Angela jumped into the chat, and I think that one's been that one has been answered. I was wondering, did the average size of plantings differ a lot across the regions?
Don, I'm looking at Don or Angela. I don't know across the regions. I know the average was around 30 hectares, and we did have ones that went from just basically spot on 5 hectares all the way to we got 199 hectare one, or was it slightly?
Yeah, we had the full complement, and most regions had a big spread, so the average kind of masks a lot of variability, and it would have varied between the regions. I can't recall exactly how much so. I think Tasmania tended to have smaller plantings, probably because they're often smaller holdings, but maybe Angela can prove me wrong with another post. But yeah, the one thing I would add, apart from the average, is we did see the full range within most regions.
Thanks very much, Don.
And quite an interesting geographic spread too. Like we didn't have them all clumped around Nick's house, for example, in area. You know, we did genuinely have in most regions and reasonably spread across each of the regions. And that provided sort of diversity in where they were, and diversity, I assume, Don, in what your model was throwing out in terms of benefits.
And are there key changes to the delivery or the outcomes that are being sought under the second round of the pilot, or is it running out and is it aiming to achieve the same sort of thing?
Same sort of things. However, we're trying to encourage applicants and ultimately proponents to engage with the private sector more. Obviously, with our timeframes, we didn't have a lot of opportunity to encourage interaction between sellers and buyers, if you will. So proponents and potential buyers of the ACCUs or potential investors in the projects. And that's an element that we're really trying to encourage in the second round. For the second round, it's going to open very shortly and run through to March. So we've got more time, and that allows everybody to take a bit of a breather, but also to give us that opportunity to try and connect some of the companies that are out there in particular with potential proponents. And on that, I will say that I've always been somewhat skeptical about the existence of private investors. I know there's a lot who are keen to buy ACCUs. I mean, the minute we announced this, there was a flood of companies come running saying we want to buy ACCUs from these projects. But we've even found that there are companies out there who are interested in buying biodiversity services, even from straight enhancing remnant vegetation projects, so even projects without those carbon benefits, which is really encouraging. And I think the big question for this second round of the C+B is, do we have any companies out there who are willing to pay the upfront payment? So to basically push the Commonwealth out of the way and pay the proponents the upfront biodiversity payment as well as buy the ACCUs. Now, of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be separate payments. You can just simply pay more for your ACCUs and do the same thing, right? I think all of us are really interested to see whether there's that appetite within the private sector.
So I've got a question from Grace from Healthy Land and Water here. What were the biggest risks or potential risk factors or lessons from the pilot?
I'm statement for myself. The risk factors, let's talk about them first. You know, in terms of the proponents, that the risk of failure was one of the big things. A lot of proponents scared by, I sign up, I take the biodiversity payment, it doesn't cover the full establishment costs. I'm out of pocket by, let's say 50% of the establishment costs. The project, a lot of the plantings die, and as a consequence, I don't get ACCUs going forward unless I'm able to replant those areas, or that I might even have to give back some of the biodiversity, some or all of the biodiversity payment money that I received. That was a big risk. We identified that really quickly, and with Dor, with Angela and others, and ultimately said to proponents that you won't have to give back your biodiversity payment in the event that there's a natural disturbance that kills your plantings. If you go and bulldoze them, you will, but still you lose the opportunity to get carbon credits if you have, or you may lose the opportunity to get carbon credits if you have a broad-scale mortality event. That I think was a key learning. The other learning, which I think probably everybody on this call will say, well, of course that was the case, was that point I made before about the fact that there is a significant proportion of farmers out there that are really keen to put trees back on their properties, but they either don't want to or can't raise the capital to cover establishment costs. That I think we all knew that cohort was out there, but it's real, and I think it's really quite large. So any incentive programs that can be designed to meet that need, I think, would be fantastic. And this C+B program doesn't quite meet that need because they still got to raise a substantial proportion of the upfront capital. And I think that's an opportunity for future government programs to look at. But Don, help me, what else were the other key learnings?
I'm drawing a blank, sorry.
Oh, well, the other one I thought was the platform. I thought, again, hopefully Nick will comment on this, and Susan, I thought the platform was really successful. We had 5.5 weeks to build it. That was both the mapping platform, the databases that run off that platform, and also the application form. So being able for farmers to be able to go on the site, do some decent project planning, get data they need to do financial planning, and then to go through and use a reasonably user-friendly application form, and it's all done. I think that was really successful, and we got a lot of really positive feedback on that. And I was really chuffed. I was one of the ones who was saying, look, guys, we got 5.5 weeks. There's no way we're going to be able to do this. And I think Don and others went, nah, it's doable. Come on, crack on, let's do it. And through the work, a lot of hard work by all of us, I think, including the NRM groups, Cogent, who is our partner, the Mullion group, everybody involved, we got it up. And I think that was a demonstration that this is possible, and this sort of thing can really help these processes reduce transaction costs for everybody and put smiles on the digital nerds who love these sort of things.
Yeah, I'll be one of those. In terms of lessons rather than risks, the partnership with the NRMs is like the elephant in the room. We can't not mention that. It was fantastic. Thanks to all of them on the call now, and looking forward to working with the next group as well. And there was one other thing I had. It was about the kind of the need for capacity building more broadly, especially in terms of supply of tube stock and all of that stuff. There are significant constraints. It's okay in some parts of Australia, but a lot of the places where you'd like to see these sorts of things scale, you kind of get nervous when you think about scaling it without investing in nurseries and all those other things that we need to be able to do this at the right scale.
Yeah, we ran into that real hard, didn't we? And Susan's on the line. Susan knows in her region, not many suppliers of native seed and seedlings. We've had similar shortages in other areas. The other key learning I think we got out of this is that my knowledge of just how biodiverse Western Australia is was not quite adequate. I didn't fully appreciate that you could have plant communities over there that have 1,000 species in the plant community, and sort of blew my head off.
Thanks very much, Andrew and Don. I've got 2 more questions, and then we'll go to our other speakers that we've got for our panel discussion. So I've got those last 2 questions. So this one we've got from Christian Bell in Arid Lands. So much of the discussion, scoring, and emphasis seems quite tree-centric. Does the system cope well with habitats such as Gibber that don't naturally have trees?
Yeah, I'd say the reason we're focused on trees is primarily because we're talking about that carbon plus biodiversity pilot in the first instance, which was about an environmental planting method for carbon sequestration. But the benefit scoring system I talked through certainly can be applied to grasslands or even gibber. It gets a bit hard, especially with gibber, to think about condition kind of change and how that might be influenced by management in some circumstances, but the principles of thinking about condition change and then regional benefit by looking at average condition of ecosystem types, I think is transferable. And certainly for enhanced remnant veg, it wasn't just about trees. It isn't just about trees. It's about sort of using the appropriate benchmark for condition, which is the undergraded natural state. So it's transferable, and the emphasis on trees is just because of that being the main activity and the method we were using.
Thanks very much, Don. And the last question that we've got before we go on to our other speakers is there thought given to measuring, pricing, or otherwise motivating the resilience of the plantings or the risk associated with them? For example, climate resilience, resilience to flood or fire or natural disasters.
Yes. In short, in the planning protocols we have, we point people at resources to get them to think about that. And we have a series of pretty simple high-level suggestions. At the moment, we don't score that sort of thing in Don's benefit scoring system. Nor do we directly price them in the pricing model, other than to say that if as a consequence of building in resilience into your planting, that increases your costs, then your biodiversity payment offer will increase, everything else held equal. And the negative impact that is it can adversely affect your benefits cost score. That's at the moment, we don't really have a way to directly accommodate it. Don and I and Dean have actually been chatting this morning about ways that we can modify and improve the planning protocols and possibly even the benefit scoring system to account for more diverse plantings, for example. Can we come up with a more complex way to do that? And is that going to ultimately improve these projects? Balance between making it user-friendly, making it accessible, while also trying to encourage people to plant the most biodiverse plantings as possible. And there's a balance to be struck there, and so we're having that discussion internally, which touches on the question of resilience, I think.
Great, thanks very much, Andrew, and thanks very much, Don.